The quantum decryption lab hummed with an electricity that had nothing to do with its advanced circuitry. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's fingers moved like a concert pianist across holographic interfaces, her augmented neural implant burning with an intensity that made the air around her shimmer. She knew she was close. Too close. The transmission fragments had been buried beneath layers of quantum encryption so complex that most would have dismissed them as digital noise. But Elena Rodriguez was not most people. Her grandmother's unexplained death during the global pandemic of 2247 had been more than a family tragedy. It was the spark that had driven her entire career. "God damn it," she muttered, rotating a holographic data cluster with a precise mental command. The neural implant, a prototype developed by her own research team, allowed her to interface directly with the most advanced computational systems humanity had ever created. A pattern emerged, then another. The fragments began to align like pieces of a cosmic puzzle. The lab's environmental controls suddenly shifted, a barely perceptible change in temperature. The kind of micro-adjustment that would go unnoticed by most, but not by Elena. Her augmented senses, a result of years of neurological research and experimental modifications, detected the anomaly instantly. Someone was here. Her hand moved imperceptibly, triggering a series of quantum-encrypted defensive protocols. The lab's security systems, far beyond standard military-grade protection, began to recalibrate. Microscopic nanobots embedded in the walls and floor began to mobilize, forming an invisible defensive network. The shapeshifter chose that moment to strike. What appeared first was a perfectly formed human representation, tall, athletic, with features that seemed almost too perfect to be real. But Elena saw beyond the surface. The molecular inconsistencies, the slight temporal distortion around its edges. This was no human. A concordance infiltrator. The creature moved with impossible speed, its form rippling like liquid mercury. But Elena was already moving. Her neural implant overclock kicked in, perception stretching milliseconds into perceived minutes. The world around her slowed. She saw the molecular restructuring of the infiltrator's arm, transforming into a plasma-based molecular disruptor. Deadly. Designed to dissolve organic matter at the atomic level. A weapon that could erase her existence in a fraction of a second. Her own defense was already in motion. The quantum-encrypted data package hidden within her neural implant began to activate. Not just a simple data storage system, but a complex, self-defending information construct that was part computer system, part biological defense mechanism. The lab erupted into chaos. Holographic interfaces shattered. Quantum computational matrices twisted and reformed. The nanobots in the walls transformed from a defensive network into an active combat system, launching microscopic electromagnetic pulses designed to destabilize the shapeshifter's molecular structure. "You have no idea what you're protecting," the infiltrator spoke, not with a mouth. The sound emerged directly into Elena's mind. A psychic communication method typical of high-level concordance operatives. Elena's response was a burst of quantum-encrypted data, a weaponized information packet that struck the creature's consciousness like a digital sledgehammer. The shapeshifter staggered. In that moment of vulnerability, Elena completed the data decryption. The full scope of the concordance's centuries-long manipulation crashed into her consciousness like a tsunami of betrayal. Pandemic records, suppressed technological developments, engineered economic collapses, subtle genetic manipulations designed to keep humanity contained, controlled, limited. Her grandmother's death. No longer just a personal tragedy, but a calculated action in a millennia-long strategy of human suppression. The infiltrator recovered, its form reshifting into something more combat-ready. Molecular density increased. Defensive capabilities enhanced. But Elena was already moving. The data was secured. The truth was about to be unleashed. And the Galactic Concordance had no idea what was coming. The transmission spread like a quantum wildfire. Within hours of Elena Rodriguez's data burst, every screen, neural interface, and communication channel on Earth transformed. What had begun as a classified research breakthrough became a global revelation that shattered the foundations of human understanding. Admiral Marcus Chen stood in the Unified Earth Command Center, watching the world change in real time. The holographic displays around him were a kaleidoscope of data, communication networks, and real-time global responses. His entire 40-year military career was now revealed as an elaborate construct, a carefully managed illusion designed to keep humanity docile and contained. "Sir," a young communications officer approached, her voice trembling, "we're seeing unprecedented network activity. It's like everything is connecting." Chen knew connecting was an understatement. The global neural network that had been dormant, a theoretical project buried in black-budget research, was spontaneously activating. Millions of latent neural interfaces, previously thought to be simple communication devices, were revealing themselves as something far more complex. In Mumbai, a former call center worker named Vikram Mehta found his standard-issue communication implant transforming. What he'd always believed was a simple translation and communication device was now a quantum-encrypted computational node. Algorithms he'd never understood began to flow through his consciousness, revealing patterns of global manipulation. In Sao Paulo, a collective of underground programmers, led by Marina Santos, watched in real time as their custom-built quantum decryption tools began interfacing with global systems. The Concordance's communication networks, believed to be impenetrable, were being systematically dismantled and analyzed. "It's a distributed intelligence," Marina muttered, her fingers dancing across multiple holographic interfaces. "We're not just breaking their systems, we're understanding them." Back in the command center, Chen received a priority communication from Dr. Rodriguez, not through standard channels, through a quantum-encrypted pathway that seemed to bypass every known communication protocol. "Everything we thought we knew is a lie," her message read. "And now, we're going to fix it." The global response was unlike anything in human history. This wasn't panic. This was awakening. Underground resistance movements that had existed in isolation, technological rebels, conspiracy researchers, marginalized scientists, suddenly found themselves interconnected. The neural network wasn't just a communication tool. It was a collective intelligence platform that allowed instantaneous sharing of knowledge, strategy, and technological understanding. A researcher in Beijing discovered advanced propulsion theories that had been systematically suppressed. Moments later, engineers in Toronto were integrating those theories into preliminary spacecraft designs. A genetic researcher in Nairobi uncovered hidden modifications in human DNA, evidence of long-term genetic manipulation, and immediately shared her findings with medical teams across 5 continents. The Concordance had made one fundamental miscalculation. They believed human potential could be contained, controlled, limited. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Chen watched as traditional military hierarchies dissolved. The neural network didn't just share information, it redistributed expertise, strategized collectively, and adapted in milliseconds. Traditional command structures became fluid, dynamic systems that could respond to threats with unprecedented speed and creativity. "Sir," another officer approached, "global military communication systems are reorganizing themselves." Chen understood. This wasn't just a communication shift. This was a fundamental restructuring of human potential. In less than 12 hours, humanity had transformed. Not through violence, not through traditional revolution, but through the most powerful weapon they possessed, collective intelligence and adaptability. The quantum transmission that Dr. Rodriguez had triggered was more than a revelation. It was a reset switch for human civilization. And the galaxy was about to learn that humanity was nothing like they had been led to believe. The global collaborative research nexus wasn't a building. It wasn't even a single location. It was a living, breathing network of the most brilliant minds humanity had ever assembled, connected not by physical proximity, but by a quantum neural mesh that defied every known law of communication and collaboration. Dr. Kai Liu stood at the epicenter of this intellectual hurricane. A brilliant quantum physicist whose autism had been systematically marginalized by traditional academic structures. He now found himself leading a transformation that would rewrite the fundamental understanding of technology. To his left, Dr. Amal Nkosi, a genetic engineer from Johannesburg, manipulated holographic DNA structures with the same ease most people might scroll through a messaging interface. To his right, Dr. Elena Rodriguez continued her work on quantum decryption, her neural implant now integrated with a global research network that made previous supercomputers look like children's calculators. "We're not just developing technology," Kai muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We're evolving it." The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A neural network algorithm developed by a collective of neurodivergent programmers in Buenos Aires began to demonstrate something impossible: adaptive learning that didn't just process information, but anticipated technological needs before they were even conceptualized. Marina Santos, the Brazilian programmer who had been instrumental in the initial network breakthrough, watched in real time as the algorithm began to self-modify. It wasn't just learning. It was evolving. "Attention," she broadcast across the global research network. "We have something." The something was a nanotechnology platform that could restructure itself in real time. Not just adapt, not just respond, but fundamentally reimagine its own molecular structure based on environmental conditions and potential challenges. Dr. Nkosi's genetic research provided the biological template. Kai's quantum computing principles gave it computational power. The global neural network provided the collective intelligence to guide its development. In the Unified Earth Command Center, Admiral Chen received the preliminary report. The document itself was alive. Literally. The text shifted, providing additional context, anticipating questions, showing potential applications and risks in real time. "This is beyond a weapon," Chen realized. "This is a living technological ecosystem." The Concordance's suppression had done more than limit human technological development. It had created a pressure cooker of innovation. Every breakthrough that had been hidden, every technology that had been shelved, every radical idea that had been dismissed, they were all bursting forth simultaneously. A team in Nairobi developed adaptive energy systems that could draw power from quantum fluctuations. Researchers in Seoul created communication interfaces that could translate not just languages, but entire cultural contexts. A collective of indigenous technologists from the Amazon developed biotechnological systems that integrated with natural ecosystems in ways no previous civilization had conceived. Kai watched a simulation of the adaptive nanotechnology. It wasn't just a technological system. It was alive, thinking, evolving. "We're not creating technology," he said to Elena, his voice a mix of wonder and scientific precision. "We're giving birth to a new form of intelligence." The adaptive nanotech could restructure itself to solve problems. A medical nanite could transform into a computational node. A communication interface could become a defensive shield. The boundaries between technology, biology, and intelligence were dissolving. Elena understood immediately. This wasn't just a technological breakthrough. This was a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could be. Within 72 hours of the global awakening, humanity had developed technological capabilities that would have taken traditional research methodologies centuries to achieve. The Concordance's carefully constructed barriers had not prevented human innovation. They had concentrated it. Like a compressed spring suddenly released, human potential was exploding across every conceivable technological frontier. The galaxy was about to receive a masterclass in human innovation, and they had no idea what was coming. The attack began with silence. Not the absence of sound, but a profound, calculated emptiness that spread across galactic communication networks like a digital neutron bomb. Admiral Marcus Chen watched the initial phase of humanity's response with a precision that bordered on artistic. In the Unified Earth Command Center, holographic displays showed the systematic dismantling of the Concordance's infrastructure. But this was no conventional attack. No missiles, no energy weapons, Just pure, weaponized information and technological manipulation. "Commence Ghostweave Protocol," Chen commanded. Across millions of light years, the Concordance's most critical systems began to die. Not with explosions, not with dramatic failures, but with a calculated, surgical precision that was somehow more terrifying. On the Concordance's primary communication hub, a massive orbital station that had coordinated interstellar communications for millennia, the first signs were subtle. Quantum communication pathways began to shift, imperceptibly at first, then with increasing complexity. Marina Santos, the Brazilian programmer who had become a key architect of humanity's response, worked from a decentralized network that spanned continents. Her fingers danced across quantum interfaces, each movement a strategic strike more precise than any military weapon. "Target acquisition complete," she muttered. Initiating information cascade. The Concordance's faster-than-light communication network, the nervous system of their galactic civilization, began to unravel, not through direct destruction, but through a process of systematic deconstruction that was almost biological in its approach. Adaptive nanites, developed in the previous research phase, began to infiltrate the alien communication infrastructure. They didn't destroy. They repurposed, transformed, revealed. Every suppressed communication, every hidden manipulation, every strategic lie that had been used to contain humanity was now being systematically exposed. On a dozen alien homeworlds, communication systems began to broadcast the full, unfiltered history of the Concordance's manipulation. Classified records, suppressed scientific discoveries, economic interference, genetic manipulation. The truth became a weapon more devastating than any physical assault. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched from her quantum research hub. The attack was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Humanity wasn't just fighting. They were revealing, exposing, transforming. "It's not about destruction," she explained to Admiral Chen via their quantum encrypted link. "It's about illumination." The Concordance's defensive systems, designed for physical threats, were utterly helpless against this approach. Their quantum encryption was being used against them. Their communication networks were being transformed into conduits of their own exposure. On the primary Concordance administrative planet, government centers went dark. Not through power failure, but through a systematic revelation of corruption that paralyzed their entire political structure. Military communication channels dissolved, not through jamming, but by revealing the complex web of manipulations that had maintained their power structures. Economic systems collapsed as hidden financial manipulations were brought into the light. And through it all, humanity did nothing more than reveal the truth. Admiral Chen understood the profound nature of the attack. This wasn't just a military strategy. This was a complete systemic reset. "We're not destroying them," he said to his command team. "We're giving them a chance to rebuild." Honestly, the quantum neural network that humanity had developed allowed for something unprecedented: total transparency, complete exposure, a systemic reset that didn't rely on violence, but on pure, unfiltered information. Within hours, the Concordance's millennia-old power structure had been completely dismantled. Not through conquest, not through destruction, through revelation. As communication systems across the galaxy began to stabilize, they revealed a fundamental truth that the Concordance had never understood about humanity. Humans didn't just fight. They transformed. The first cracks appeared on Centauri Prime, the historical capital of the Concordance. Ambassador Krelax, a senior diplomat of the Morphine Collective, watched in real time as centuries of carefully constructed galactic hierarchy began to disintegrate. The massive holographic displays in the central governance chamber flickered with cascading revelations, each transmission more damaging than the last. "This is impossible," Krelax muttered, their multispectral sensory organs shifting through multiple perception modes. The human transmission defied every known principle of interstellar communication. It wasn't just a data breach. It was a complete systemic deconstruction. On 17 different worlds, simultaneous rebellions erupted. Not violent uprisings, but something far more dangerous. Informed populations suddenly understanding the depth of their systemic manipulation. A Harlock planetary consortium, once a model of galactic cooperation, dissolved within hours. Their entire diplomatic corps discovered they were nothing more than puppets in a complex manipulation scheme. Military leaders found their command structures were elaborate fictions. Economic systems revealed themselves as carefully constructed illusions. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the galactic response through a quantum-entangled observation network. This wasn't chaos. This was systematic revelation. They're not just falling apart, she explained to Admiral Chen. They're being given a chance to rebuild. The panic wasn't uniform. Some civilizations responded with terror, others with a strange sense of liberation. The Quantum Transparency Network, humanity's newly developed communication platform, ensured that no manipulation could remain hidden. On the methane seas of liquid harmony, an entire planetary governance structure collapsed when its leaders were simultaneously exposed for generations of genetic manipulation of their own species. The revelations came not through human intervention, but through the aliens' own communication networks, now fundamentally altered by humanity's initial strike. Ambassador Krulax observed something unprecedented. Civilizations that had been bitter enemies for millennia were suddenly finding common ground, not through diplomatic negotiations, but through the shared experience of systemic exposure. The Morphean Collective, masters of molecular transformation and psychological adaptation, found themselves uniquely vulnerable. Their entire cultural system was based on layers of carefully constructed illusions. Those illusions were now evaporating faster than their most advanced molecular transformations could adapt. Humans have weaponized transparency, Krulax realized. It wasn't a physical weapon. It wasn't even a technological weapon in the traditional sense. It was something far more dangerous, a weapon of collective understanding. On the crystalline cities of the Zentari homeworld, entire populations began spontaneous restructuring of their societal systems. Military leaders found themselves replaced not by force, but by informed citizens who suddenly understood the depth of their previous manipulations. The Concordance's communication networks, once the most secure in the galaxy, had become conduits of their own destruction. Every attempt to contain the information only spread it faster. Admiral Chen understood the profound nature of humanity's approach. "We're not conquering," he explained to his command team. "We're liberating." The quantum neural network humanity had developed allowed for something unprecedented: total transparency, complete exposure, a systemic reset that didn't rely on violence, but on pure, unfiltered information. Some civilizations fought. Some collapsed. Some began immediate, radical transformations. But none could ignore the fundamental truth that was now spreading across the galaxy. Humanity was not what they had been led to believe. They were something else entirely. A species that could dismantle millennia of galactic manipulation not through violence, but through the most powerful weapon in existence: the truth. As communication systems stabilized, a new question began to emerge across countless worlds. Who were these humans, and what were they going to do next? The galaxy held its collective breath. The Galactic Assembly Chamber was a monument to millennia of carefully constructed diplomatic architecture. Carved from living crystal harvested from 1,000 worlds, it had been the centerpiece of galactic governance for over 10,000 standard cycles. Now it felt more like a funeral hall. Dr. Elena Rodriguez and Ambassador Aisha O'Keek walked into the chamber, and the entire assembled multitude of alien civilizations fell silent. They were not accompanied by weapons, not by military escorts. Just two humans, walking with a precision that spoke of something far more dangerous than physical threat: knowledge. Krulax, the Morphean Collective's senior diplomat, observed their approach with sensory organs that could perceive quantum-level variations in emotional states. What they detected was unprecedented. No fear, no aggression, just a cold, calculated determination that defied every known diplomatic protocol. Representatives of the Galactic Concordance, Ambassador O'Keek began, Her voice transmitted through a quantum adaptive translation matrix that ensured every nuance was perfectly understood. "We are here to discuss justice." The word hung in the chamber like a physical presence. Alina stepped forward, and with a gesture, the entire chamber's holographic systems came alive. Not with human propaganda, not with accusations, but with a systematic, meticulously documented history of manipulation. Pandemic records, suppressed technological developments, economic interference mechanisms, genetic manipulation protocols, every single piece of evidence, laid bare. "We are not here to destroy you," Alina explained, her neural implant interfacing directly with the chamber's communication systems. "We are here to offer a path to redemption." The ultimatum was comprehensive, not a list of demands, but a roadmap to systemic transformation. Complete transparency, full disclosure of all manipulative mechanisms across all member civilizations. Reparations protocol, not monetary compensation, but a structured system of technological and social rehabilitation for civilizations that had been systematically suppressed. Governance reconstruction, a complete redesign of galactic governance structures with built-in transparency mechanisms that prevented future manipulations. Cultural exchange and development programs, mandatory knowledge-sharing initiatives that would break down the existing hierarchical structures. Krellax realized something profound. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a restructuring. The chamber's holographic systems began to display the human proposal. But it wasn't a static document. It was a living, adaptive system that showed potential outcomes, risks, and collaborative pathways in real time. "You've weaponized diplomacy," muttered a Zentari representative, their crystalline form shifting with a mixture of terror and grudging respect. Ambassador O'Keefe's response was measured. "We've democratized possibility." The human delegation had done something unprecedented. They had transformed a potential moment of vengeance into an opportunity for collective growth. Each piece of evidence was accompanied not just by an exposure of manipulation, but by potential pathways for healing. Not punishment. Transformation. Some civilizations would resist. Some would collapse. But the pathway was clear. Change was no longer optional. "We give you a choice," Alina concluded, her neural implant projecting a holographic representation that showed multiple potential futures. "Collaborate, or be left behind." The silence that followed was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a fundamental shift in galactic understanding. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to liberate. And the galaxy would never be the same. Krellax watched the human delegation. No weapons, no traditional displays of power. Just two individuals who had just redesigned the fundamental architecture of galactic civilization. The true invasion had not been physical. It had been conceptual. The collaborative reconstruction hub wasn't a building. It was a living, adaptive network that spanned multiple star systems, a testament to humanity's new approach to galactic interaction. Dr. Kai Liu stood at the epicenter of this transformative process, his neurodivergent mind seeing patterns that traditional diplomatic systems had missed for millennia. Beside him, Marina Santos manipulated holographic interfaces that were part communication system, part healing mechanism, part evolutionary architecture. "We're not rebuilding," Kai explained to a delegation of Morphean representatives. "We're reimagining." The first phase of reconstruction was counterintuitive to every existing galactic paradigm. Instead of punitive measures or territorial redistribution, humanity proposed a radical approach: systemic healing through collective knowledge and adaptive development. On the methane seas of liquid harmony, entire planetary governance structures were being reconstructed using a revolutionary framework. Adaptive AI systems, developed through a collaborative human-alien research initiative, began to map out potential societal reconstructions that took into account each civilization's unique cultural and biological characteristics. Dr. Alina Rodriguez oversaw the technological transfer programs. These were not simple technology exchanges. They were comprehensive rehabilitation platforms that addressed centuries of suppressed development. A team of neurodivergent researchers from 6 different planetary systems developed communication protocols that went beyond traditional linguistic translation. They created empathy matrices, computational systems that could bridge not just language, but fundamental cultural and perceptual differences. Communication is more than words, Marina would explain during her intervention workshops. It's about understanding the fundamental ways different species perceive reality. The Zentari crystalline civilizations, once masters of molecular manipulation, found themselves learning entirely new approaches to societal organization from human social scientists. Collaborative governance models that emphasize transparency, adaptive decision-making, and collective well-being replaced millennia-old hierarchical structures. Admiral Chen's role had transformed. No longer a military leader, he was now the primary architect of inter-civilizational collaborative frameworks. His approach combined strategic thinking with a profound understanding of systemic healing. "We're not conquering," he would repeatedly explain to skeptical alien delegates. "We're offering a pathway to collective evolution." The reconstruction wasn't just technological or governmental. It was fundamentally philosophical. On a dozen worlds, educational systems were being reimagined, not through human imposition, but through collaborative design that respected each civilization's unique evolutionary path. Neuroscientists from Earth worked alongside biological researchers from the Morphean Collective to develop learning systems that celebrated cognitive diversity. Krelax, the Morphean diplomat who had initially viewed humans with suspicion, now found themselves a key architect in this transformative process. The human approach defied every traditional understanding of interspecies interaction. "They're not just solving problems," Krelax reported to their own governing councils. "They're expanding the very concept of problem-solving." Technological transfer programs became living systems. A communication technology developed for one species would spontaneously adapt to meet the needs of another. Quantum adaptive networks allowed for unprecedented levels of collaborative innovation. The most radical transformation occurred in governance models. The humans introduced a revolutionary concept: governance as a continuous, adaptive process rather than a fixed system. AI-assisted democratic platforms allowed for real-time policy adjustments, transparent decision-making, and unprecedented levels of citizen participation. Dr. Kai Lu's adaptive AI systems became the cornerstone of this new approach. They weren't just computational tools. They were evolutionary frameworks that could understand and adapt to the complex, nuanced needs of different civilizations. "We're not exporting a system," Kai would explain. "We're providing a methodology for collective growth." As star systems began to reconnect and rebuild, a new understanding emerged. Humanity wasn't a conquering species. They were architects of possibility. Transformation wasn't something that happened to a civilization. It was something a civilization could choose. And humanity had just shown the galaxy how to make that choice. 10 standard cycles after the initial revelation, the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Collaborative Reconstruction Hub, watching a live holographic representation of galactic interactions. It was no longer a static map of territories and boundaries, but a dynamic, pulsing network of interconnected possibilities. "We didn't conquer," she said quietly to Admiral Chen, who stood beside her. "We evolved." The transformation was complete, yet never truly finished. The human algorithm, a complex, adaptive approach to civilization-level problem-solving, had become more than a methodology. It was a living philosophy that had fundamentally redesigned galactic interaction. On 1,000 worlds, societies were learning to breathe differently. Governance had become a fluid, adaptive process. Educational systems celebrated cognitive diversity. Communication transcended traditional linguistic barriers, becoming a multi-dimensional exchange of understanding. The Morphean Collective, once masters of molecular manipulation, had developed entirely new forms of societal organization. Their cities were now living, adaptive ecosystems that responded in real time to the needs of their inhabitants. Krelax, once a skeptical diplomat, now led a revolutionary research initiative that explored the boundaries of collective intelligence. Dr. Kai Lu's adaptive AI systems had become the backbone of this new galactic infrastructure, but they were more than computational tools. They were evolutionary frameworks that understood the nuanced complexity of different civilizations' developmental paths. Intelligence is not about dominance, Kai would explain in his interspecies lectures. It's about adaptation, about understanding. The technological transfer programs had evolved into something unprecedented. A communication technology developed for the crystalline beings of Zenteri would spontaneously adapt to meet the needs of methane-based life forms in the liquid harmony systems. Quantum adaptive networks allowed for levels of collaborative innovation that had been unimaginable a decade earlier. Marina Santos, now leading the Galactic Collaborative Research Network, oversaw projects that defied traditional scientific boundaries. Researchers from species that had been bitter enemies for millennia now worked together on challenges that spanned entire star systems. The human approach had introduced a revolutionary concept: problem-solving as a collective adaptive process. Planetary rehabilitation programs addressed centuries of suppressed development. But they weren't imposed solutions. They were collaborative frameworks that respected each civilization's unique evolutionary path. Admiral Chen's role had transformed completely. No longer a military leader, he was now the primary architect of inter-civilizational collaborative frameworks. The defense systems he once commanded had been reimagined as adaptive protection networks that emphasized prevention and mutual understanding over conflict. The Galactic Assembly was no longer a static diplomatic structure. It was a living, breathing network of collective decision-making. AI-assisted democratic platforms allowed for real-time policy adjustments, unprecedented levels of transparency, and citizen participation that spanned multiple star systems. We gave them a choice, Elena explained to a group of young researchers. The choice to grow, to heal, to become something more. The most radical transformation was philosophical. Civilizations that had been isolated for millennia now saw themselves as part of a larger, interconnected ecosystem of intelligence. The concept of territorial boundaries had been replaced by networks of mutual understanding and collaborative potential. Technological development was no longer a competitive process. It was a collaborative journey of collective discovery. On the observation deck, the holographic representation of galactic interactions pulsed with life. Each connection point was a potential for growth. Each interaction a possibility for understanding. We didn't create a new empire, Chen reflected. We created a new way of being. The human algorithm was more than a technological or diplomatic approach. It was a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could be. Not a tool for conquest. Not a mechanism for control, but a pathway to collective evolution. As the holographic display continued to pulse and shift, Elena understood the profound nature of their transformation. They hadn't conquered the galaxy. They had invited it to grow, and the galaxy was accepting the invitation.